Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
In a moment, we're going to dive into an interview with Mike, who identifies as an INTJ personality type. A few things to keep in mind before we get started. First, we may use some shorthand and technical language in this interview. So if you want to download a handy guide that will help you visually follow along, visit personalityhacker.com and you can find that PDF directly below this episode. Second, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that Mike has been through our profiler training program and he knows type and he knows himself really well. So with that in mind, I want to encourage us to look past stereotypes that you may have for the INTJ personality. Now, if you're brand new to type, just a reminder, I stands for introvert, N stands for intuitive, T stands for thinker, J stands for judger. These four letters are technically called dichotomies, and they're what most people know about personality type when they get started. But the true power of the system comes from understanding personality on a much deeper level, and these are called the cognitive functions. In this conversation with Mike, we're going to dive into the cognitive functions and talk about them, how they show up for him in his personality. To get an overview of the INTJ cognitive functions, what I recommend you do is go over and search a podcast we've already recorded about this. It's actually called INTJ Personality Type Advice. You can search for it on our website. The cognitive functions can be a bit technical at times, so I recommend downloading that handy INTJ guide directly below this episode. Just head over to personalityhacker.com and you can download that PDF. Today on the show, we have a special guest, Mike Holden. Mike, welcome to Personality Hacker.
Hi, Joel, and hi, Antonia. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, man. And we invited you on today because you, in the Myers-Briggs system, identify as an INTJ. And you've also been through our profiler training program, our advanced profiling, our profiler coaching. You've been around the community for a while. And so you know type, and you've been involved with Personality Hacker, and we thought we could talk today about what it's really like to be an INTJ in life. Not just the theory, not just the abstractions, but what a lived experience of an INTJ is, Mike. And so before we do that, though, what do we need to know about you?
Well, I first discovered Personality Hacker 4 years ago, and I'd only just learned that I was an INTJ at that point. And I think one of the first podcasts that I listened to that really had an impact on me was about intuitive blending. So yeah, it basically opened up all kinds of new sort of ideas about who I was and, you know, what I wanted to be doing with the rest of my life, because basically my wife bought me some earphones for Christmas 4 years ago, and I just binge listened to all the Personality Hacker podcasts at the beginning because it was like the first podcast that I found. Because in the year prior to that, I'd kind of just been discovering Myers-Briggs and things, and I kind of felt like there's something in this. This makes a lot of sense. I had typed as an INTJ when I'd done some sort of online profiles in different places, and it just suddenly began to, you know, it started to make a lot of sense for me. So that was it, really. That was the beginning of certainly this chapter of my personal growth journey. So I'm 46 years old. I'm in the process of building my first business. Having previously been a journalist, kind of reached a point where I could see the writing on the wall for journalism and for my job as a freelancer that I was going to be struggling in the coming years. So that kind of gave me the push to start my own business. So that's been me for the past 4 years, but it's been it's kind of ramped up. I've always had an interest in psychology and personal growth, but it's kind of ramped it up to the next level in the last 4 years or so, and running a business alongside it has kind of been, it's imperative that I understand my own type in order to be able to run this business most effectively off very little resources at the beginning.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that intuitive part first. I want to go and highlight that. I love the fact you talked about this idea of intuitive blending. You heard the podcast where we talk about that. I'm guessing that you'd gone through your life. What was the reason you were blending? Like, what was your cause of having to hide away your intuition and act a little different than how you're naturally wired?
I think the place where I gave myself permission to use my intuition was in betting. I've always been passionate about betting and betting on soccer, and you know that's just kind of something that's been a consistent theme throughout my life. But everywhere else, I just kind of felt like I had to try to blend in and be like everybody else. And I think a lot of this has got to do, in my life, has come out through drinking alcohol and through socialising in that sense. I've now not been drinking for 4 years. It's just a choice I made 4 years ago to pack in the booze. And prior to that, it was like alcohol was like a release for me to be just like everybody else. It's almost like I'd have a couple of pints and all of a sudden there was an ESFP or something, and it was like, I just kind of relaxed and was more in the moment and was just, it's kind of stopped mentally trying to find the meaning in everything and, those kinds of things. So I think my blending was basically this lifestyle that I created for myself, where I would probably spend lots of time in my own world. I worked in a casino for the best part of 10 years. So when you're at the tables in a casino, you're kind of on your own, you're just dealing, you can do it on autopilot. So then my mind could run wild and, I could kind of just go into my own little world while I was dealing games of roulette and blackjack and dice. But I couldn't wait for the weekends, for the social side of it. And it was only through alcohol and through drinking and in that sense that I built up this network of a big social circle I was part of, and all my, basically everything that I did for the best part of 20 years of adult life involved alcohol in some way. So I kind of reached a point, you drink heavily for 20 years, and it might not be, not every day, it might just be, every weekend is an event at the weekend, and, I could be out all day drinking. It's kind of 20 years of that. You reach a point at the end and you just think, this is starting to concern me a little bit now that, things aren't, it's not like 25 anymore, you're not even 35 anymore, and I'm starting to ask all these questions. And it was through personal growth and then understanding my personality type and understanding that the way that I kind of always sensed I was different to most people, that there were reasons for that, and they could be easily understood and could be mapped out, and you could start to understand what it is you really want to be doing. That doesn't necessarily, you can kind of strive for happiness rather than just constantly chasing pleasure.
Wow. So you said things that I tagged like 3 or 4 different things just now as you were talking. The first one is that what I hear you saying is that in order to be able to survive feeling different, I think it's unusual for an INTJ to openly claim that they really enjoy socializing, but I've seen that, by the way. I've seen INTJs be very, very social and really enjoy it, but then when they're there, they always feel like they're on the outside. And it sounds like you were also driven to have a social circle, but when you got there, the only way to feel like you were part of it was to go to unhealthy behaviors. Because I'm assuming you're kind of referring to the introverted intuition driver part of you, or dominant part of you, that perspectives probably always felt like an outsider. And so you're going to your 3-year-old or inferior function of extroverted sensing or sensation in order to feel like you were fitting in.
Yeah, I think possibly what it might have been is over-processing it, but on my own terms, in my own world kind of thing, when I was, I built a lot of my social relationships through alcohol. So, I'd go to work, for example, I'd socialise with the people I was working with at the casino, and I'd have I'd have good relationships with those people, and I could be, very, very comfortable with those people around. But I think breaking down those initial barriers with people, I was just a lot more comfortable in scenarios when it was involving drink and things like that. So it was a case of either, in some scenarios, kind of hiding my perspectives driver, or not wanting to overburden people with it, not wanting to go too abstract too quickly, or just be in the moment more is probably the best way to explain it. And now I look back and reflect, it makes total sense that if that sensation 3-year-old's going to come out at some point, it made total sense the way it did come out for me long before I even understood type. So there was balance there, but it wasn't healthy in the way that I used to go to my sensation 3-year-old.
I think it's interesting. You were talking about, you've always been really passionate about things like betting on soccer. And by the way, thank you for calling it soccer to translate it for an American audience. But you're talking about football, right? Internationally known. Yeah. And so you're saying you've always been passionate about betting on football. And you kind of indicated that that was something that was unique to you, but I would imagine that that would be something that was very popular in an international crowd, particularly in England, where you're originally from, even though I know that you live in Spain now. How did that feel like it was a disconnect from others? Was it like a way of that you were thinking about it, or did you just find that when you met people who had the same interests, it didn't necessarily mean that they were like-minded?
As I'm thinking this through now, I'm kind of, I think I just always wanted to be, I'm just going back to what I was thinking about, those experiences and why I drunk and why I wanted to be social. I kind of just wanted to be cool and never felt cool, but, like just in a real popular sort of way. And that's the piece. I never really struggled to build relationships through football or through betting, through talking about those things, and my intuition could come out and I could have real good conversations about things. So I don't think necessarily I was struggling in that regard. I'm not really sure. Without alcohol, I just always felt like, I don't know, that I couldn't sort of have conversations on the same level necessarily, that I'd always end up dragging the conversation into something a bit too abstract at different points.
Well, what I hear in what you're saying, we know as an INTJ, that 3-year-old of extroverted sensing or sensation, it generates energy for you as an INTJ. Like that's really where, it's weird. If you're an INTJ listening right now, you're gonna be like, wait, what are you talking about? It generates energy. I have a weird relationship with that part of me, but the energy that you have in life often comes from that sensation process. And I think what I hear you saying is that when you're drinking, you felt you had a synthetic sense of a lot of energy, and you were quote unquote cool. I think cool people, when we look around in social settings and see cool people, they're the people who are relaxed in themselves but have a lot of energy to give to others, and they're abundantly focused in social settings. And so my guess is you almost looked and said, man, I want to be like that kind of person, that high energy, maybe not like, the class clown type energy, but just have a lot of energy to have in that social setting. So you can be outgoing, you can connect, and people will look at you and be like, whoa, he's a cool guy. I want to hang out with him. And you're attractive because of your energy and everything you're generating. And I'm guessing alcohol was like a shortcut to that experience.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's probably nailed it, actually, because, I've never really thought this through, or certainly had this conversation where I've talked it through to that kind of conclusion. But yeah, I think that makes total sense. It is about the energy and charisma, possibly, of just being that popular guy. I feel like I've always got, the potential, like the conversations in there, but I needed the alcohol to bring it out. I needed it to just be totally comfortable, and in some regards as well, possibly just switch the voice off in my head that was constantly overthinking things sometimes, situations, and just relax and just be happy to be in somebody's company. I think that was another part of it.
So then when you discovered your type, your best fit type, and you said that this was about 4 years ago, you had just started to get into Myers-Briggs. Where did you find Myers-Briggs, by the way? What was your first introduction?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I know I've read the book. I can't remember the timeline and the order, but I know I've read the book Gifts Differing. I've taken a couple of online tests, which might have well been personality hacker before I discovered the podcast. Also 16 personalities and some of those resources. I was playing with this idea. I'm thinking there's something in this. There's something in personality typology that makes a lot of sense to me. We've talked before about the barrier of entry to the cognitive function level. And that was a hurdle for me, and it was only through binge listening to your early podcasts that kind of got me through to really beginning to understand the nuance of individual functions and how you could actually look at different aspects of your life on a cognitive function level, and then begin to think things through. How would you make changes? What might that look like in the future if you start changing your lifestyle in certain ways and things like that? For me, it was like Christmas 2017. I got the earphones and then binge listened at the start of 2018. And as I'm talking this through now, I'm thinking about the timeline, and I think there's absolutely a connection to getting those earphones, discovering the Personality Hacker podcast from just doing a search over that Christmas, and then stopping drinking in February 2018. I felt like I think I had stopped drinking once before for about 18 months. And then basically started again because, I was a bit lost and not really knowing what the new life would look like, or, I kind of just felt a bit lost with it. And then once I discovered the Myers-Briggs system and your podcasts and how I might be able to use this and begin to shape what a middle-aged version of me is going to look like, that's how it all began, basically.
So you discover Type, and then you discover our podcast, and you start to get into these cognitive functions and understand what it means to be an INTJ. Not just, it sounds like you kind of knew something was here, but you weren't sure what yet. And then when you were able to put the pieces together of understanding how you're cognitively wired, now it sounds like, or what I hear you saying is it created a path. Like you now had things that you could be working towards. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because it sounds like that time period of stopping drinking and then getting to the other side of that is a big part of your personal growth journey. Can you talk a little bit about what the journey looked like after that? Like when you were starting to put the pieces together of not needing the social lubricant, of not needing, this crutch. Now you had all these other options, but what did they look like for you?
I think what I've done more than anything is thrown my life into my business. I've basically created a business around, everything that I'm passionate about, out of necessity, but also out of understanding this is something I could really throw my energy into. And there's a big possibility that further down the line it's going to repay me back, in a big way, potentially. I had big ideas and ambitions and aspirations at the beginning that this was going to be overnight and that I could build something fantastic, and within 2 years, I'd be living off my own means and comfortable and stuff like that. I'm now realising it takes a lot longer than that. I'm now right now I've reached a point where I feel like I'm at peace with the fact that this is a real struggle, and it could still be a real struggle for the next 4 or 5 years, as it has been for the last 4 or 5 years. But now I'm really comfortable with that struggle. I think what personal development and what the Myers-Briggs typology system has done for me more than anything, I could conjure up my own answers. I didn't have to go and find a particular book to suddenly answer questions for me. I didn't have to have somebody give me the answers. I could work out the answers for myself. I could, the how-tos of how to make a certain situation better, or how to alter a certain aspect of your life. Things like diet as well, it's like I'm intermittent fasting now. I live that lifestyle. I just eat 1 meal a day. That's something I've got very comfortable with. And there's all these hacks. A lot of them are hacks. A lot of them are time-saving devices. A lot of them are energy-saving devices. And it's just all kinds of things that I know that I've kind of worked out for myself, that the payback in the future is worth the investment at the beginning. And so I'm kind of trying to weave all these different... I'm trying to constantly upgrade my habits, I think, what it is. And through understanding my own personality type, I'm able to strike upon solutions to any particular problem. It's just like a constant mini upgrade of different habits and behaviours, just to eventually become a better version of yourself.
Mike, you're making this challenging for us, because as you talk, there's like 20 things I could go down the different lines of. You're saying such good stuff. I'm like, oh man, I want to ask about that and go down that road. Oh man. So I just have to pick one. Let me go back to the beginning of something you said about you had this idealization when you were starting a business. Oh, it's going to be this many years. I'm going to be on my own. And I think probably a lot of INTJs would identify with this idea of having visions of what they can do. And I hear often from INTJs like, yeah, I could do that. If I applied myself to that, I could totally make that happen. And this is about how long it would take. But what you did is you actually started getting into action. I mean, you activated that co-pilot or auxiliary function of yours, extroverted thinking or effectiveness, and you started putting actual pen to paper, actual numbers to sheets. Like you actually started doing the things externally and making things happen. And that gave you so much feedback on, oh, this is going to take a little longer than 2 years. But I can still do it. It's still doable. It's still a pathway in front of me. I can still see the end point. But you got calibrated through action, and you have probably a more sober-minded sense, no pun intended, a sober-minded sense of what this is actually going to take. And so it probably will become a reality in some ways.
Well, what I heard him saying is that when he was changing his habits away from things that were unhealthy because he was entering a time period in his life where it was like, I can't bring these habits with me into this time period.
Yeah, that's true too.
What you ended up doing, and I would be very curious to know whether or not this was intentional, but you ended up going to that co-pilot or auxiliary of extroverted thinking or effectiveness and stretching it. Because, I mean, you were a journalist and, you provided for your family. And so I'm assuming that you were implementing plenty of extroverted thinking or effectiveness before.
Of course, yeah, of course.
But by starting a new, company and starting your own business, now you were stretching that part of you, which gave all of your energy something to do, as opposed to just sort of sitting there and churning and unsure of what to do and then going to that 3-year-old or inferior. That's what I heard you saying, is that you kind of threw yourself into that. Was that intentional? Did you go, I'm an INTJ, I should probably be throwing myself into that co-pilot or auxiliary function?
Basically, my relationship with extroverted thinking has changed over time, and I think initially it is about getting started. It certainly was about getting started. A lot of it was to do with, I've had these skills for a number of years, but feel like I've never fully utilised them. In terms of, I've always been writing. Writing was my sort of primary, medium that I'd be sort of apply my skills to. And I've always been told, I'm a talented writer and stuff like that, but I felt like I've not really got an awful lot to show for it. And it felt like an opportunity to be in a position where you know that your future is going to be very uncertain as a freelancer. And you have all these frustrations about what editors were wanting you to write about or how they were wanting you to write. And then suddenly thinking, right, you've got this blank canvas now that's yours, that you can do what you want. So the imagination's fired by that of what you could create, and everything that you thought was wrong with the industry prior, well, now's your chance to fix it and build your own sort of corner of journalism, your own company that does everything what you believe is the right way. So that was a catalyst at the beginning, but also it was this fact that I felt like I'd not had an awful lot to show for anything. So I don't think I struggled for motivation on that point, but over time, my relationship with extroverted thinking was a lot of rushing around at the beginning, and constantly, it was a good habit to get into, to constantly convince yourself to get into action, don't be lazy. It's kind of, just get going, just keep moving, let's keep everything moving forward all the time. But over time, as I've kind of feel like I've got a bit more sophisticated with it, now I take real pleasure in creating systems. I mean, this is a bit cliched, but creating systems that save my energy. So, I've got, a software developer in India that builds pieces of software for me. So anything that's remotely repetitive on my computer that I have to do every week, I outsource this job and get this piece of software back that does it for me. Things like that I find really satisfying. So being able to come up with anything that saves me time in the future, that's kind of become a mini addiction now in itself. I've always, it's hard not to get cliched here with, the cliched INTJ things, but it is, I'm thinking so many steps ahead, systems I want to build in the future, and I feel like I am working towards them. It's not always a straight line, the path that I'm working on. Because I'm able to see so far down the line and be relatively confident that is where I want to go, it's encouraging me to use my extroverted thinking in that way of what can I get built for me that saves me time in the day-to-day. And that's it basically. It's just looking for those long-term compound effects of, of systems that I'm creating now. And I'm beginning to realise as well, a lot of the stuff that I do with my business is, football analysis. I'm realising that there's a lot more leverage and a lot more mileage in being able to create like tables and graphics and things like that can be automated, that don't actually need me to be in front of a camera to show anybody, or you almost build the onboarding process and then leave the graphics and the systems that you've built with the people after they've seen how you've explained how they work and how to understand this stuff. Then it's almost like you don't have to be there. Yeah, this is what I'm learning most through business, is that, the business is teaching me a lot that's kind of bringing out the best of myself in those kinds of ways, I think.
So did you start this business after you discovered your type, or were you already in the process of transitioning?
It was possibly a side hustle. I always think the timeline's difficult with this, but the business became an official business in March 2018. So I'm thinking of that timeline, stopping drinking in February 2018, and then suddenly your business is registered in March 2018. And it's like, right, this isn't all coincidence. Just thinking back now, this isn't all coincidence. But yeah, it was like a bit of a side hustle that I understood that there was, I'd built some systems it's basically a rating system for rating football teams. I'd built it for myself in order to be able to write journalism articles quicker, so the numbers could paint a picture for me very quickly, that I didn't have to go doing tons of research, because I had this rating system that I developed, and it'd tell me form guides of how teams have been performing over several weeks and whether they were particularly weak in defence or attack, or and that would be my starting point for the research. It was kind of giving me a leg up all the time, and I was thinking, actually I can share this with people and make money off it as a side hustle. So that process had already started first, and then it kind of became a business. I just went all in. 2018 was the year when I went all in with it.
So I guess I'm sort of circling the drain around the business that you built. Did you build it to honor all of your cognition? Like, does it tick all the boxes? Like, thing that you're doing right now, you're saying that it feels like it brings out the best in you, but would you say that it's like sort of ergonomically designed for how you're cognitively wired?
Yeah, I do think so. Yeah, and I think even more so over time. I'm even thinking back now to the INTJ mentorship program that we did. What came out of that for me was the focus on emotional intelligence and that introverted feeling 10-year-old. And since then, that has now become a real passion of mine, to kind of understand emotional intelligence. But I think with a lot of these things, and I think this speaks to the football analysis, to do with the betting as well, I always kind of apply it to other people first. I always like emotional intelligence, maybe, I kind of did do some work on myself and tried to understand my own feelings and emotions and how it was affecting my performance and stuff like that. But I also think sometimes you apply this to your understanding of football teams or football managers and their leadership styles, and then you begin to see it very real in other people first and foremost, because I think sometimes you can kid yourself about what's going on for you, or you can hide away from certain things sometimes, subconsciously maybe. But in applying this to my understanding and my analysis of football teams, I feel like now I'm almost on the brink of this frontier where I think emotional intelligence is so misunderstood in football, and I think it's the next big thing that people don't understand, because data science and analytics has gone, so granular now in understanding sports performance, and yet everybody kind of understands that motivation's a big part of, what motivates football teams to why you can see the statistics of how a team performs, but they're still no less predictable from one week to the next. Yet if you can understand the emotional intelligence, then I think things do get a bit more predictable. And in applying myself to trying to understand emotional intelligence, it kind of almost just filters into your own lifestyle anyway, because you're putting so much focus on it. I think what I'm saying is if I was just purely focusing on myself, I'm not sure I'd put in the work as much as I do when I'm focusing on other people first, and then understanding, well, you can't hide away from this. This applies to you just as much as it applies to them, kind of thing.
What I hear you saying is that when you tap in, because I guess the leading question was, are you seeing how all of your cognition is wrapped in this? And you're saying, yeah, even elements like my 10-year-old or tertiary function of introverted feeling or authenticity, that gets honored in what I'm doing, because I'm understanding people's emotions, their motivations, like as it relates to their relationship to this sport. And so that it sounds like that's giving you sort of a competitive edge. And I bet your introverted intuition or perspectives loves that. It loves seeing what's coming down the road, where this industry could go, how you could be leading it. But then on top of all of that, it also relates back to your own relationship to your motivations and intentions. Like, you need to be the person who is, if you're going to help lead an industry in a direction that is kind of inevitable for it to go, you also have to be somebody who has done that deep dive into yourself. And so the business that you're a part of is also giving you a push in your own personal growth direction, it sounds like you're saying.
Absolutely. And I think only recently I've discovered that there's no turning back as well, because I just a couple of months ago got offered a job for just sort of consultancy work, but it was a job that was going to be demanded on my time, and it was for a company that I would have loved to have worked for and had this role 3-4 years ago. But I kind of tried it on for size for a couple of weeks, and straight away was thinking, this isn't taking me in the direction I want to go. It's kind of eating up my time in a direction that I'm not going. And I had to turn around after 2 weeks and sort of let that company down. And it's kind of made me realise now that, yeah, I'm all in, you know, and I think it's been a very good thing for me on a personal growth level, because I think if you wasn't totally all in, you know, you can take shortcuts sometimes, and I've been tempted to take some shortcuts along the way just because you're trying to make ends meet from one month to the next. For the most part, the past 4 years, I've generally been heading in one direction, and it's like, if any sort of success does come with it, I'm sure it would look like it was overnight to someone, you know, outside of what I've been doing, but I've kind of just been buried away, sort of working intensely on this now for a number of years.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
So then it's not just a matter of this business giving you an opportunity to stretch that co-pilot or auxiliary of extroverted thinking or effectiveness, but actually it's allowed you to grow to a point where now you're understanding how to use that introverted feeling or authenticity, 10-year-old or tertiary, to serve that extroverted thinking. Like you figured out the balancing act between those two, because you working hard and, you know, thinking in terms of setting up systems and ROI, that all comes. It comes naturally to you, and you've been able to flourish in that. But now you're at a point where you're like, and also I'm going to do things that honor the direction I'm going. I'm going to do things that honor, you know, me as an individual, not just get it done, not just make the resource, but also like if something feels off or wrong to me, I'm going to go, okay, that's not for me. I'm going to say no to that opportunity and then continue to go in the direction that's right for me.
Yeah, and I think also, I do think that, you know, I am beginning to appreciate more and more how the extroverted thinking and introverted feeling work in tandem with each other. And the fact that quite often, you know, well, always, I suppose, the emotions come first and the logic comes later. That's something that took me a long time to realise was, you know, I could make rational sense of almost any situation and convince myself, you know, I was being rational. But ultimately, at the beginning of every rational thought you have almost is a desire weaved in there, even if you've not noticed it. And I think that's helped me lately to understand that as well, is that if you don't get your emotional intelligence right and you don't understand, you know, if you're completely blind to it, you can go through life, you can move through life believing that everything you're doing is rational. But if the starting point of that logical path that you're going down was an emotion that you didn't understand, or, you know, you don't know what desire it is that you're trying to satisfy, you know, that's one of the big things I've learned lately is understanding how those two pieces work together in tandem.
Oh yeah, because otherwise it's jerking your chain and you don't even know it.
I have a question about, again, going back to the generating energy and social lubricant that alcohol probably provided you in social settings. You wanted to do a big reset in your life. And it was such an important part of your life. It was such a key tool that you used for so long. I'm gonna make a statement here that I don't know to be true. I'm gonna use my pattern recognition, my intuition, and say something and posit something, and then you correct and calibrate me to where I'm off on this. I assume that your move to Spain, and you live on the east coast of Spain on the Mediterranean, so it's probably nice weather, sunshine. There's energy that comes from your environment, and I'm guessing that move was part of your reset of life because you knew you needed to generate energy and have something pleasant around you that wasn't going to involve alcohol to generate the energy you needed for the business, for your lifestyle, for all the things you wanted to do. Was that move part of that? Was that an intentional thing, or was that just accidental?
I do think it was part of it. I think the 3-year-old sensation, you know, my aspiration, I think, is one of success. And even if that's a shortcut to success, you know, you can be really popular if you're drinking with alcohol and you're surrounded by, you know, lots of friends and you go into all the fancy nightclubs and things like that. Or you can feel successful just lying on a beach whenever you want, and those kinds of things. And I think that's always been there. You want to work towards this position where you know, the aspiration is to eventually one day sit back and lie back on a beach and, you know, just feel like, yeah, all my work is done now, I can relax, kind of thing. And I knew that I could have that on tap by moving to Spain. But I think there was, you know, I did want a lifestyle change at that point. And that was probably the very, very beginning. In those days, my personal growth journey was, you know, embryonic at that stage. I wasn't, you know, it wasn't consuming all of my life to be reading personal development books and stuff like that. But that's probably the time that I did get into reading and start reading these kinds of books that involved, you know, the human mind and psychology and those kinds of things at the same time as making this move away. I met my wife, who's now my wife. My final year at university was 2005. So we'd been together for 3 years, and, you know, everything was going well, and we just decided to, right, okay, you know, I was from Manchester, she wasn't from Manchester, but came to live in Manchester for a while. But it felt like it was more neutral territory, and we both kind of, you know, we kind of tried it on for size. We were just thinking, let's go and see. We both loved the idea of going to live for a couple of years in a nice climate, in a new country. And then within 2 years of living here, we got married here and we've stayed here and we've now got 2 children. That was all very subconscious, but all very understandable now that I understand my type. You know, it all does make sense, the fact that it's this sunny climate and this. And I was always turned on by the fact of having this really stressful lifestyle in the office, in the home office, having to meet these deadlines and getting really stressed out about time-related issues. And then when a deadline was met, I could just go to the beach and switch off. Yeah. And that ability to contrast that it was, you know, I was working for companies in London, in here, in my office, but then as soon as I walked out of the door, it was, you know, mañana, and the lifestyle was very, you know, very slower paced and more relaxed, and you could just go and satisfy that 3-year-old sensation instantly.
Gotcha. So I must have misunderstood. I thought the move was more recent, but it was actually in the past. But I want to highlight something you said in the midst of all of that, which is, you said, I wanted to feel successful. That could be, you know, working or building something, or that could just be the laying on the beach. What I heard in that is that you were really clear, or you've been becoming more and more clear on your motivation, like what you actually want, not the things that will lead to what you want. But like laying on the beach is a symbol of success, for example. Ostensibly, you've had to have built a lifestyle that enables that. And I think that's really interesting, that I hear a little bit of introverted feeling authenticity language and knowing what you want and then building a life around it. That's probably really powerful for an INTJ to be able to use that process, particularly to identify the things you really want. Because we think we want a bunch of stuff, but what we really want is what comes at the end of all that. Like, I don't want a bunch of money. I want what money can buy, for example, right? I want the lifestyle money can give me, not money itself. That doesn't interest me as much. And I think that's something that INTJs, if they get really clear about, and I'm guessing you did too, what is it that you really want? Now, everything else, it in a sense, your life organizes around that desire.
Yeah, I do think so, yeah. And it's you know, something else has just come up now as you were speaking then, and I don't know if anybody would resonate with this, but when I was younger, I was always told I was really, really clever, and, you know, at school, or that because I was quick on the uptake, I think it's the pattern recognition side of things. But I never lived up to what anyone's expectations might have been. And I think there was a sense of entitlement. I think I was always had this sense of entitlement that because I was told that I was really smart from a young age, and I was consistently told it by so many people, I kind of reached a point where I'm thinking, well, you know, is this all I've made of it? Why can't people see it now? Why am I not running this company, or why am I not doing this job? And why, you get out in the real world, you become an adult and you get out into the real world, and all of a sudden it's like you've got to start really grafting. And I think I always got my compliments way too quickly when I was younger. And I think what has developed over time is this run into shortcuts almost, you know, of wanting to taste this success and you can there's a shortcut for it, and it's because I possibly from an early age haven't built up the resilience. It's something I'm working on now a lot, actually, and having to work on with the business, is this sense of building up resilience over time. And I think people that have it really hard at school, for example, or have things really difficult from an early age, do build up a natural sense of resilience that then enables them to go on and be successful. And I think a lot of what I've done in my life, I've kind of done upside down, or I've arrived at a lot of my understandings later in life that, you're thinking, if I'd have known this 20 years ago kind of thing. That's just something that came up then as you were speaking, thinking about it.
I think that is going to resonate with a lot of people listening right now. And the person listening right now that's the INTJ listening, it may really resonate with them. Because I think I experienced this too, Mike, as an intuitive, as a child. I remember, somebody told me, like, it's like you have 5 brains. You're so smart. I'm not that smart. I'm figuring, I don't know. I just look at the world different. But you get this positive reinforcement for how you show up to the world. And it's like, everybody just tells you as a teenager or a young person, like, oh, you're going to go on and do amazing things. And you almost expect it just to happen right out of university or something. Like, oh, okay, I'm just going to get all this stuff because everybody's told me I'm so intelligent or smart or wise or insightful. I think that this is probably something that a lot of intuitives particularly struggle with. And then they get to real life and the reality of you have to go put the work in. You can't just see the insights. You can't just see down the road or have the perspective shifts or, see what's possible or the visions of something. You have to go actually build that thing and you have to care about it and you've got to put the grind in and work a little bit every day toward your goals. It's something that I think, especially as an intuitive, you want to skip steps. You want to take shortcuts. You can see what's possible. So you're like, can't we just be there now? Do I have to go through all the work to get there? Can I just skip to the end? And I think that's a hard lesson for many of us that are intuitively wired.
I think that encapsulates it for me quite well, yeah, because it does feel like the resilience is a big thing, and it's just something, there's just so much even now that I'm discovering, the struggle of building a business is a lot of tedious stuff that you have to do, and, there's no shortcuts that can be taken. It's, it's the biggest the 2 biggest things I'll try to live my life to is just building habits and understanding compound effects. And the entire concept of compound effects is very recent in my life, to understand that all genuine sort of lasting success in life comes from compound effects.
Well, and non-success, it can be a bad compound effect too, the opposite direction. If you had kept drinking, for example, and you start to age, and that was your tool still, the compound effect of that's eventually going to catch up to you.
Absolutely. And it's something that, and I think this is why now I'm spending so much time, I have a daily habit sheet, just very, very small things that are just, a to-do list to tick off every single day, things like meditation and gratitude and stuff like that, and jobs that are related to the business, and the small jobs that you wouldn't do, like just checking in with your spreadsheet every day to see the finances, because you can lock your finances away in a closet and stay blind to what the reality is of your business, your profit and loss sheet and stuff like that. But just checking in for a couple of minutes a day, even if it's just to format a spreadsheet, but if there's something alarming pops up, you've seen it. And I've got all these habits that are every day, and I just think, right, if I set the right system of habits in place and I do them, 5 or 6 days out of 7 every week, and I get to tick them off my list, and over time, over a year, 2 years, 3 years, the compound effects eventually will begin. It'll begin to bear fruit. The fact that you're doing this day in, day out, and it's not necessarily about having to always dive deep. Finances was something I would do once every 6 months, and I wouldn't rest until it was complete, and I'd just go through this week of dread, like a tidal wave of negative emotion over what I'd uncovered from what I'd left, a stone that I'd, not sort of turned over in however long. And just by checking in little bits every day with some of these things that you just have to do, you can't get away from, I'm kind of fully bought in now to the compound effects in the future will reward me for doing this behavior every day.
What I just heard there is, every time I delayed my extroverted thinking, what I should be doing, externalizing and thinking and doing the work I should be doing every day, I saved it up to try to probably save energy. And then I had to do it all at once in like a week, and it caused terrible emotions from my authenticity or my feeling process. I hated that feeling. So now, to keep that process clean, to feeling good, I do a little bit all the time. And now I don't have that horrible feeling. I've got good feelings every day because I'm on top of it and I'm taking care of it. So now I've used my extroverted thinking effectiveness to help my emotions feel better too. Like, this is part of your emotional management as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been a recent development as well, because I have done, and with a few things, like I talked about stopping drinking. Well, I did stop drinking for 18 months, and then, I kind of fell back into the same patterns for a few years, and then eventually did stop drinking a few years later. It's the same with habits. I feel like a lot of these things that I'm doing now that I've landed on, I have tried at some point, and I've kind of, but I think it's really important to understand the meaning why. And I think I've kind of arriving at a point now where, because I've read so many books and I've really thought long and hard about a lot of these principles. Now I don't need to convince myself the meaning why, of why this needs to be done every day anymore. So now it just becomes a habit that does give me that little dopamine hit every day. And sometimes it's something very small that I'm doing, so it's not like, it's this thing of getting away from always having to reach the end point of every task you take on. Everything has to be done to completion. That was my early understanding of extroverted thinking, was getting things done meant, you could take on the biggest project in the world and it has to be done today. By breaking it up into manageable sort of bite-sized pieces, you're still getting it done. You just showing up every day. That's the important thing, is just constantly showing up every day. And it doesn't matter, it's not about outcomes. It's at the end of the day, I don't judge myself on the outcomes. I just judge myself on showing up to do the processes.
I don't know if we could have scripted this better.
This is amazing.
You're giving such great information, and I just, a couple things that you said that I think are noteworthy is first of all, when you're trying to develop these good habits before, you didn't have a meaning, you didn't have a reason why. It's like you would stop drinking, but it was like, why am I doing this? And then you'd go back. But what I hear you saying is that and it's probably, there's a lot of nodes in these systems, so it's not just you understanding your type, but if we're going to look at it through that lens, you understand, well, this is how I'm cognitively wired, so I need to be in alignment with how I'm naturally wired, and it helps give you a reason why. And so it helps keep those, it's like it satisfies that dominant or driver function of introverted intuition or perspectives, which is like meaning making. And so before, when you didn't have that satisfied, it was really hard to keep the habits going. But since that part of you, that dominant function or driver function, is satisfied with your meaning and why you're doing this and understanding your own cognition, it helps keep the flywheel spinning. And then I also heard you saying that you moved into a more sophisticated understanding of extroverted thinking or effectiveness, which, when we first really start developing those parts of ourselves, they can be very idealistic. But you said that what I heard you saying is that I stopped being idealistic, taking on the biggest project in the world and having to do it today. It's like, no, these are steps, and they go in a certain sequence in an order, and it's my job to show up and keep that sequence going. And you remove the idealism, which is a more youthful version of that, and it became more mature and sophisticated by going, no, this is actually how I get things done. I'm also hearing, well, actually, I'd like to ask you, and I'm hearing evidence of it here and there, but I'd love to hear it in your own words. Extroverted sensing or sensation before was gobbled up with socializing and drinking. And we've talked a little bit about, moving to Spain and being able to be near the water and have an experience, of like when my work is done at the end of the day, I get to go just be on the beach and experience that. But are there other ways that you've noticed that your extroverted sensing or sensation has shown up for you now that it's no longer being gobbled up with, something like alcohol or, something that kind of deadens your mind? Are there ways that you get into that 3-year-old or inferior function that are healthier, that are more conducive, or just you've noticed have changed over time as your entire self is maturing? How have you seen that part mature with you, I guess, is my question.
I think things like doing this podcast and doing things like hangout calls on my business with my own subscribers, and just taking more risks in the moment without, I say in the moment, like it's just the first word that comes to mind when you think of sensation. But yeah, just not having to take a long run up and take, you have to go through a lot of iterations of trial and error of things. And I've worked with coaches who I'm pretty sure have been, sensation drivers, who I've kind of quickly identified this could really help me to work with someone of this kind of personality type who's going to be constantly on my case to get things done and to, when it comes to the marketing side and things like that. So I think I've been pushed out of my comfort zone a lot more in recent years, just through, just having to kind of go for it at short notice with certain things, whether it's campaigns or things like that. Yeah, the challenges of family life at home as well. I always thought that my best work was done elsewhere. I used to have this limiting belief previously that, I spent time in a co-working space and things like that, or going out for days out at, empty seaside resorts. I'd take my laptop and I'd, go and do work there, and I'd convince myself that my best work would happen in those places. And I think now I'm better able to cope with working at home, even if there's bits of noise around the house. And now we've got a dog that's still a puppy, so I'm having to take the puppy for a walk every day, and that's an hour of my time every day that I never dreamed I would have a year ago. I just never would have been able to contemplate that I could just give up an hour of my day to walk a dog. But it's actually, the benefits that come from having a dog, that, being able to combine gratitude with the dog walk and stuff like that, and have that experience every single day. So I think things like that have come about. It's just, I just think these new things find me more than I've actually gone chasing anything to, for it to manifest in different ways. I think a lot of this stuff, it's only when you look back, you realise how much you've changed. You don't actually, a lot of these things you don't choose, they just manifest as a result of your habits day in, day out.
Again, I'll say that's on the negative side too. Like some people get to the part of their life like, how did I get here for the negative part? And you're kind of like, how did I get here for the positive part? And you trace it back to the process and the habits that you've set up and that day in and day out experience, and you're weaving lifestyle in. You're not living in an abstraction of the future. You're living in the here and now. Like you're talking about your extroverted sensing sensation, bringing to the present moment, walking that dog for an hour every day. You can't like schedule that next week on the calendar. Like that has to happen today. The dog has to go to the bathroom, it needs to get outside. You need, go for your walk now. And so I think that's really powerful how you've woven that into like a daily habit, daily practice for you.
As you were saying that then, being in the here and now, and it just occurred to me like that being here in this office at home is enough now. I've reached a point where I've embraced the struggle. I remember, the podcast you did, was it Surrender to the Work? And I remember that resonating with that at the time, because I was at a point where I really had to, the holidays were over, I had to push myself back into work. And I feel like I've got to a place now where that's my experience every day. I'm just kind of surrendered to the struggle. I'm actually embracing and enjoying the struggle of day to day. This is enough. This is, it's not like anywhere else you think you might be right now is any better, that, you're missing out on anything. I'm not missing out on anything. This is, these are the days I'm choosing to have in building this business every day. And that, I've not really thought of that as that living in the moment. That's evidently what seems to be happening.
Yeah, I hear you saying basically like life is happening now. So I need to be connecting with whatever happens now and not pushing when I start my life until later. And I also heard you saying that one of the ways you experience your extroverted sensing or sensation showing up now is it's giving you courage. Like you said, I'm just going to show up at this podcast. You don't need this like tons of lead time and tons of give me all the questions. We didn't send you any questions, actually. We were just like, hey, we're going to be on this podcast. You want to be on this podcast with us? And you're like, yeah, let's do it. And so it gave you, it sounds like it's giving you a sense of trust in yourself to be able to show up in the present moment. And I would say you've done that beautifully. I mean, you've given so much gold in this podcast, and you didn't need the lead time. You were just able to show up in the moment. And I'm assuming that you putting yourself in those situations with your own audience and the people who follow you and your work, that's helped you really rest into. I bet your self-confidence has gone really high by having that courage and then watching yourself perform and go, oh yeah, I can trust myself in the moment. I don't have to have 10 years of lead time to be able to do a simple task.
Yeah, and I think over time I've come to realise that I actually do prefer this scenario. Like I think had you sent me some questions before this podcast, I think I would have really overthought it, and I really overanalyzed what I was going to say in response, and probably might have worked myself up into a bit of stress before the podcast even started. So I think I actually enjoy the situation of being kind of put on the spot and having to, because I think sometimes what comes out is probably more pure when it's not, you've not kind of thought it through in advance. And, I always think, INTJs have got this, always trying to prepare a chat up line, or always trying to prepare a sound bite in advance and think it's going to, and then when you try to deliver it, it's just, no, it's not hitting the spot at all, but it's just too forced, too deliberate.
Mike, this has been a fantastic conversation. I just want to ask you, I guess, if you could go back, I've been asking many types this question. There's the 15-year-old Mike, INTJ 15-year-old, who's ready to, go through the last stages of his teen years and then go into his young adulthood and start his adventure of life on his own, away from his parents and family. What would Mike now want to tell that young man to go back and talk to yourself? What do you wish you had known then about being an INTJ, about life that's coming? What advice could you offer?
I think it would be to do with compound effects. I think that's the underlying message of everything is if only just on the level that if you put £10, £50 away or dollars to understand, look, this is what happens to your money over time. And you might think that being 40 years old is light years away at this stage, but just look at, and the metrics of the numbers literally show it in numbers. I've seen somewhere somebody, if you double a penny every day, would you rather take £3 million or a penny that doubles every day for a month? And it's like, you just don't realise how much, these things can accumulate over time. And I think it's the same with behaviours. But I think if you can, to an INTJ particularly, who can sort of use this, use this as a meaning thing, that you can, this doesn't just apply to money. It applies to behaviours, it applies to habits, it applies to everything. And just understand the nature of compound effects. This is not linear. And, I've seen it explained as though, you have a valley of disappointment first before you begin to get your rewards. So there's a lot of disappointment in those early habits, a sense of you not getting your returns that you deserve for the time and effort that you've put in. But eventually you reach a point where your behaviours are on autopilot and then the rewards start coming afterwards. And if I could have just understood that concept very much earlier in my life and really had that drummed into me, I'd like to know how that might have changed my behaviours.
Mike, thank you so much for being on the show this week. This has been gold. We've really enjoyed talking to you and mining your mind for wisdom.
Oh yeah, no, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for showing up with it.
Pleasure, guys. And I guess this is the best opportunity for me to turn around and thank you two personally as well for everything you've done for me, because discovering the Personality Hacker podcast and the Profiler training courses and Profiler coaching and everything else is it's just given me we talk about the meaning and the meaning of why I stopped drinking and knew it would be a really important lifestyle change for me. And if it wasn't for you guys, I don't think that this journey would have been anything like as comfortable or as rewarding.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Truly, truly.
So you've been listening along to our conversation here with Mike. You've heard me and Antonia and Mike talk on the microphone, but you haven't had a mic yet. Well, Mike, I'm using the word mic, M-I-C. You haven't had a microphone yet. You have a mic because you just heard him talking. But we want to hear from you, basically. You haven't had a microphone. We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. You can ask a question, leave a comment, share your thoughts. Also, we'd love to hear your story. Are you an INTJ that's been through your own growth journey? Maybe you're in the midst of it. Maybe you're starting out on your journey. You're a young person and you're just getting ready for life and you've got some questions around that. We want to hear your stories about what's going on in your life. Or maybe you have an INTJ in your life. You're in a relationship with one or a friendship and you have some comments or stories to share about your experience too. We'd love to hear from you over at personalityhacker.com. Come over and make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, I'm going to read it. It helps us out a lot, and also it makes us feel better, right? It doesn't just help us out by like letting other people know how we're doing. It gives us a boost, a little bit of juice to keep going. So head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review and give us that little extra energy packet to keep going. We've got a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. We put a lot of time and effort into the book. And also part of what we weave in is a lot of information about how your cognitive functions work, which are the mental wiring of your mind. You heard Mike talking about understanding his personality type and understanding how he was wired. It sounds like he was probably just ready for it, but also it literally changed his life. And it can do that. It literally changed my life to discover how I was cognitively wired. So if you want to get a greater insight into that element of your personality type, get our book, Personality Hacker, and we do a deep dive into the cognitive functions that fit your personality type. So go grab a copy of the book and then leave a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads because that helps us out a lot. We also have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality type. So if you're ready to take your growth to the next level, head over to personalityhacker.com, look at our suite of programs, and see if there's one that's right for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning. We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.